welcome to the worship service of Grace United Church in Wellsville, New York. We're so glad that you're joining us today, and we hope that you feel a sense of God's presence as we worship together. I'd like you to imagine something. Imagine a person comes to you and says this story. I was out driving in the car the other day when I had a punctured tire, and I pulled off to the verge, and I opened the boot, and there was no spare, so I opened the bonnet. Fortunately, a lorry driver saw my raised bonnet and then stopped to help me out. Anyone who follows that story has probably spent some time in the British Isles. Winston Churchill once said that the English and the Americans are two great peoples divided by a common language. And this story is, of course, a case in point. Would you like an American translation? I was out the other day driving when I had a flat tire, and I pulled off to the shoulder and I opened the trunk, and there was no spare in it. So I opened up the hood, and fortunately, a truck driver saw the raised hood and stopped by to help me out. The way that we talk reveals something about where we come from. It reflects our roots, so to speak, or our orientation. Interestingly, it can also reflect our orientation in life, can't it? When writers develop lines for a character, they adapt the speech of each character to reflect that person's personality and their perspective, and sometimes even their motives. Sometimes I get a kick out of some of these old John Wayne lines, like, "Big mouth don't make a big man," or "Slap some bacon on a biscuit, and let's get going, we're burning daylight." It takes a good fire to burn down the weeds to let the flowers grow. Well, it's not how you're buried, it's how you're remembered. When you come against trouble, it's never half as bad if you face up to it. "Friend, you better get another line of work. This one sure don't fit your pistol." His words reflect his rugged character. For those of you who haven't heard of John Wayne, he's an actor who used to play a tough guy in Western movies and in war movies during Hollywood's golden age. He appeared in about 180 film and television productions. He was a popular icon of masculinity, and he went by the nickname Duke, though interestingly, his given name was Marion. Anyway, this actor, John Wayne, was known for his terse comments. He was tough and he was to the point. His words reflected his character. Now, we don't often think about it, but our words reflect our orientation. You know some people whose words put you at ease, they're easy to be around, their words encourage us and uplift us. Then there are those people who are difficult to be around because the words that they say are sharp and they can be painful, and sometimes they can just be negative people to be around. I suspect that our words reflect something about how committed we are to being Christ-like. This has nothing to do with accent or vocabulary or grammar. I suspect that how we communicate Christ has everything to do with what we say, with our tone, with our attitude, and with our demeanor. Just like our accents, or the interesting differences between wording between different geographic regions of a country, our internal orientation tells other people something about us. It's a simple but reliable principle of human life. How people talk reveals a lot about who they are. Do our words hurt or do they heal? Do they work in the service of truth or falsehood? Do our words build up or do they tear down? Our words are powerful. Proverbs 18 says, "The tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit." According to this proverb, we should take care to watch our words carefully. We should understand the power of our speech. There is life and death in words. It's an interesting proverb. You will eat the fruit of your words. It means that your words will come back to you. Your words can create consequences in your life, for the good or for the bad. Perhaps you've heard the phrase, "They will eat their words." Words, you see, can condemn us. This is why when you're arrested, you have the right to remain silent. And when you're on trial, you have the right to plead the Fifth Amendment. It says, "No person shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself." You see, our words are important. In the book of Ephesians, Paul explains how the words that Christians use should set them apart. He wants Christians to understand how the story of Christ should affect every part of our story. It should affect it personally, and it should affect our dynamics with our neighbors and in our communities and with our families. It should change the way that we live out our lives. Paul challenges these hearers to respond to the gospel by the way that they live their lives. He encourages Christians to throw off their old nature, like they're throwing off their old painting clothes. Now, having done a lot of painting lately, I know a little bit about this. My painting clothes were spotted and soiled and stained. I wouldn't even walk into a store with them on. If I was hungry, I wouldn't dare to enter a restaurant. I only quickly would drive through a fast food place. Throw off your old nature, Paul encourages us. Ephesians chapter 4 and 5 is a collection of miscellaneous ethical advice, and many of these instructions can help us to understand how Christians should talk to one another and to other people in the world. Verse 25 says, "Putting away falsehood, let all of us speak the truth to our neighbors, for we are members of one another." Now that one sounds like a no-brainer. Christians are supposed to speak the truth. Now everybody knows that we like to be perceived as Christians, as fundamentally trustworthy people. But sometimes there are occasions when we all skirt around the truth, maybe just a little bit. Sometimes we're led to ask the question that Pontius Pilate famously asked, "What is truth?" There are appropriate times when we might tell little white lies, like when you notice your friend's new hairdo, and you notice that it's not that becoming of them. Some of us, wanting to avoid that little white lie, will just make the observation, "You got a new hairdo." Others of us will just jump in and being nice, say, "Wow, nice hairdo," even though it might not be the actual truth. Then there is another category. There are the untruths that we tell that could have a bit of an impact on our lives. Like how about when the dental hygienist asks if you floss daily? Or when the doctor asks you if you've done your monthly cancer self-checks? Or how about when the doctor asks you about your adherence to maybe some dietary recommendations that they've made? Telling the truth isn't always so straightforward and so simple, is it? And it can go from there. We can be in situations where it is to our advantage to not be forthcoming with the whole honest truth. Maybe about our age, maybe about our financial situation, maybe about our affiliation with the AAA or AARP. We might quickly follow with explanations like, "I'm only human," or "Everybody does it," "I did what I had to do," "If I don't do it, somebody else will," "It won't hurt anyone," "I was only following orders," "Nobody's perfect." When we find ourselves advancing rationalizations such as these, we're heading in the wrong direction. Speaking the truth always and everywhere is a very important way to talk like a Christian. The only problem is that we face this simple test almost every single day. Can any of us even aspire to perfect truthfulness? It's part and parcel of our nature to bend the truth from time to time. Maybe the best we can hope for in this life is that those little ethical alarms keep going off so that we can hear them and keep that goal of truthfulness ever before us. Now here's something else that chapter 4 says about how to talk like a Christian. "Be angry, but do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, and do not make room for the devil." Wow, that verse makes you sit up and take notice, doesn't it? Be angry, but do not sin. And is this the Bible speaking? Yes, that's exactly what it says. The reason that that statement sounds so strange to us is that most of us have been taught that anger is always unchristian and it ought to be avoided, almost sometimes at all cost. Many of us have been taught that the most important characteristic of a Christian is to be nice, to not make waves, to smile a lot, to be soft-spoken, and, truth be told, almost sometimes to be a doormat. Think of Ned Flanders on The Simpsons. It seems like he lived by this commandment, be nice. Half of the power tools in Homer's garage belong to Ned. Homer borrowed most of them a long time ago, but he never returns any of them. Nor does he have any intention of ever returning them. He's even scratched out Ned's name on some of the tools and written his own name on them. But still, Homer keeps walking up to the fence and asking Ned if he can borrow his latest gadget. And what does Ned unfailingly say in reply? "Oakley dokley, neighbor." Ned is portrayed on The Simpsons as reading his Bible all of the time. But very possibly he overlooked Ephesians 4:26. Be angry, but do not sin. It's as if the Bible considers it normal for Christians to get angry. Here's a little secret, just between us. The Bible does consider it normal for Christians to get angry. Nowhere in all of the ethical instructions that Jesus gives to his disciples will you find the command to be nice in the way that Ned Flanders is unfailingly nice. It's a distortion of the New Testament to equate all anger with sin. Even Jesus himself got angry. There are more than a few Bible passages where it shows that he does. Take Mark 3, verses 1 through 5, for example. Mark reports how Jesus gets angry at the Pharisees. He looked around at them with anger. He was grieved at their hardness of heart. And why? Because the Pharisees had been objecting to Jesus' plan to heal a man's withered hand on the Sabbath day. Now, an even better known example of Jesus' anger was his cleansing of the temple. He strides through the temple courtyard, overturning the tables of the money changers and the seats of those people who sell sacrificial doves. In Mark's version of the story, Jesus cries out, "Is it not written, 'My house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations, but you have made it a den of robbers'?" Those are fighting words. In John's version of the story, Jesus is cracking a whip made of cords when he's doing this. There's nothing especially nice about what Jesus is doing there or how he's doing it. Now, the difference in both of these cases, compared to the situation where we typically feel our anger boiling over, lies in the reasons for the anger. Most of the time, when we find ourselves raising our voices and getting red in the face, it's because we feel personally hurt or injured or abused in some sort of way. Maybe the person ahead of us in the express line has 15 items in their cart. Maybe somebody just squeezed into the parking space ahead of us. Or perhaps a coworker just fired off a flaming email. So we feel injured, and so we respond by getting angry. Here's an interesting distinction. Whenever the Bible speaks approvingly of anger, the object of the anger is not our own sense of injury, but rather of injury or injustice inflicted on another person. You see, when Jesus gets mad at the Pharisees, it's because that poor man with a withered hand might not get healed. And when he swings that whip of cords in the temple, in the courtyard, it's on behalf of all of the poor, these devout pilgrims who are getting swindled by this corrupt system where they're overcharging them for their sacrifices. Many of the great reforms in human history would never have happened were it not for righteous anger. Think of where the descendants of the African slaves might be were it not for the righteous anger of William Wilberforce, who labored tirelessly for much of his life until the English Parliament finally abolished slavery, stopping the slave trade. Today, think of crusaders against human trafficking today who keep publicizing this inconvenient truth, like the fact that a great many of the male tourists traveling over to Thailand are coming to partake in the sex trade. It's a lot easier to put your hands over your ears and to hum and to pretend that this sort of thing doesn't go on in this world, or that even it doesn't go on in our own country. Did you know that a high percentage of the Asian women who are kept in virtual slavery in our country were trafficked into this country by swindlers who told them that they were going to get wonderful jobs, perhaps waiting tables or working in factories? These women have kept quiet because they're afraid of being deported. Christians and Christian groups like the Faith Alliance Against Slavery and Trafficking could certainly be forgiven for swinging a whip of cords in response to these types of situations. The letter to the Ephesians moves on to supply some more practical advice as well about how to manage anger. Do not let the sun go down on your anger. Do not hang on to it obsessively. That's good advice for a marriage, as well as for a social reform movement. Those who live their lives driven by anger eventually pay a bigger price, a personal price. Friedrich Buechner points out this in this passage from his book called Wishful Thinking. He says, "Of the 7 deadly sins, anger is possibly the most fun. To lick your wounds, to smack your lips over grievances long past, to roll over your tongue the prospect of bitter confrontations still to come, to savor the last toothsome morsel, both the pain that you are given and the pain that you're going to be giving back." Ephesians 4 says something else about how to talk like a Christian. "Let no evil talk come out of your mouths, but only what is useful for building up." Their translation, evil, as in evil talk, is actually a cleaned up version compared to the original Greek. The word literally means something like putrid, as in a bucket of rotting fish. What sort of talk is worthy of that sort of description? You might think that this passage must be about profanity or obscenity, but if you read on, you'll find that the letter writer has something very different in mind. "Put away from you all bitterness and wrath and anger and wrangling and slander, together with all malice." The scripture says, this is quite a list. Bitterness is a type of talk that keeps calling back to mind experiences of hurts or pain, some of which might be better left alone. It's possible to revel, or should we say grovel, in victimhood. We've all known injured people who just can't seem to let things go. Some people can live their whole lives and can even go to their graves feeling bitter about the way that their parents failed them in their childhood. Or they can hold grudges against their spouses or children. Some people might ruminate about a missed opportunity that happened decades in the past. Bitter talk, when it continues for a very long time without letting up, causes emotional harm to the speaker. Not to mention that the misery that it creates for everyone who has to listen to these complaints, sometimes year after year. Next on the list are wrath and anger, words that are pretty much synonymous. Anger is a strong feeling of annoyance or displeasure or hostility. Wrath is extreme anger. Now, we've already talked about using our anger appropriately and giving it a rest to maintain our own mental health. James chapter 3 reminds us of the tongue's power. It says, "The tongue is a small thing that makes grand speeches, but a tiny spark can set a great forest on fire. Among all the parts of the body, the tongue is a flame of fire." I remember one summer after worship purchasing this little book off of the book rack at my grandmother's church. It was in the narthex there. And when I purchased it, the pastor laughed, and he thought I was literally concerned about the beauty of my tongue and what it looked like. Well, I was in middle school, and I knew what that book was about. Actually, I read it several times in the following years. And in retrospect, I think it was probably a good thing for me to buy that book, because who knows what might come out of your mouth during those teenage years. But back to Ephesians. The next word that comes to mind is wrangling. To quarrel noisily or angrily, that's the definition of wrangling. It's a creative translation of a Greek word that literally means shoutings or raucous outbursts. Have you ever been around people who are like that, who like to argue? They argue the fine points of this and that. It becomes wearisome, and it actually can become distracting from us for our true calling. There's a place for anger in the Christian life. It's anger about injustice perpetrated on the weak and the innocent. We're not to use our anger for wrangling or angry arguments. Anger should be more focused, and it should be more disciplined if it's going to accomplish anything over the long haul for the kingdom of God. Next comes the word slander. The Greek word is blasphemia, which you may recognize as our English word blasphemy. Usually we think of blasphemy as talking and saying the Lord's name in vain. But in the original Greek, it means slanderous or possibly gossipy remarks of any kind. Another Greek word for slander is the word diabolos, which you may recognize as the root of diabolical, meaning devilish. It actually occurs earlier in this passage where it talks about not letting the sun go down on our anger. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, it says, and do not make room for the devil. Literally, it's not to make room for the slanderer. You may have heard Satan or the devil referred to as the father of lies, and that's exactly what this word means. To slander another person is to serve a diabolical purpose. Scottish Bible scholar William Barclay's description of slander puts it aptly. There are reputations murdered over teacups every day. Gossiping over bone china teacups is a very British image, but you can substitute a cardboard cup of a Starbucks coffee if you wish. The tendency is universal. There's a part of us that just loves to pass on that juicy bit of gossip, regardless of whether we know it to be true or not. Nowadays, we have whole new dimensions of doing this today through social media. The speed with which a slanderous remark can make its rounds today is breathtaking, and some of these comments never seem to go away. Young people's lives can be ruined by slanderous remarks made on social media. In fact, studies are showing that rates of depression and self-harm and suicide have increased among young people who have been affected by the negative and sometimes slanderous comments posted there. Apparently, we seem to be able to use this new technology to continue a very ancient practice, this practice of gossiping or slandering one another. Finally, the last word on the list is malice or hateful feelings. Many of our movies are based on the theme of revenge. Several years ago, I joined a movie club, where you can watch up to 3 movies a week for only $19 a month. Well, that year I watched a whole lot of movies. And one action comedy movie that I saw was called Cold Pursuit. This movie practically defines malice. In it, a grieving snowplow driver seeks revenge on a drug-dealing gang, on all of these gang members who have mistakenly killed his son. And so one by one, he pursues them, getting rid of them through a variety of methods and in a range of settings. This movie's undercurrent is definitely malice. In our lives, we've seen how hateful thoughts and feelings can lead to real harm. We've seen the damage that such feelings can do when malicious people are able to get weapons into their hands. From the hateful rhetoric of talk radio hosts to the neighbor who continues to perpetuate a feud with another, malice can kill. Hateful feelings can lead people to participate in terrible acts. Now, in contrast, the antithesis of all this is found in another list in Ephesians. Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ has forgiven you. Now, that's the sort of talk that Christians should truly engage in. What are some of the words that you love to hear? Words like, I love you. Come, join us. Great job. I'm with you. But sometimes the words that we hear and the words that people say to us are sharp and hurtful, like a sword. We can all think of words that hurt, like hate and stupid, you're no good, go away. It's so easy to make words into swords. Positive, upbuilding talk is a counterweight to the anger, slander, and all the rest. It is the thou shalt to balance off the thou shalt nots of the previous verses. Kindness, tenderheartedness, literally compassion, forgiveness, such are the building blocks of true Christian conversion. This is not weakness. It's not cloying niceness. It's not being a doormat. Instead, filling our mouths with positive, affirming talk is a strong and grateful response to God. It is a response to the forgiveness and the grace that we have received from Jesus himself. They say that talk is cheap. Not this kind of talk, though. Kind, compassionate, caring talk is the rarest of commodities around. Think about a time when you've been around a kind and tender-hearted person. How does that experience affect you? How does it give you peace? In our world, we are surrounded by the sound and the fury of soul-destroying hate speech all around us. Yet, that's not where we come from. Others should recognize our affiliation and our allegiance comes from another place. Our speech should identify us. Our words and our demeanor, they should stand in contrast as people identified with Christ. Our words should be kind and compassionate, caring and forgiving. This is the type of speech that Christ calls us to utter. It's how to talk like a Christian. God bless you this day and this week as you seek to serve God in your words and in your actions. Amen.
Though I may speak with bravest one and have the gift to all inspire and have not love, my words are vain as sounding brass and hopeless gain. Though I may give all I possess and striving so my love profess, but not begin my love within, the prophet soon turns strangely thin.
Come, Spirit, come.
Come, Spirit, come.